Welcome back to Creating Your Life. This is episode 10, Adaptive Unconscious, part 2. Hi, Marc-Andre Alexander back for more on the adaptive unconscious. As you'll recall, the adaptive unconscious is the spin doctor, the magician that's in your head that works between your conscious mind and your subconscious repository to make sure the pictures match. In other words, to make sure, for example, that the image you have of yourself reflects how you behave in the world. And it also goes a little bit further than that. It also maintains the truth of reality as you see it. For example, if I am certain that certain kinds of things are true, it could be a religious belief, it could be a political philosophy, it could be the way certain kinds of people are. If I have a certain absolute knowledge and assumption that certain things are true, then the world will begin to be spun that way. The adaptive unconscious makes sure that what I perceive in the world reinforces what I believe. It does this because it has a strong bias towards making us feel good. And it feels good to understand the world, to understand how people are, to understand how things should be. So if let's say ghosts were real. Whether or not they are is not the issue. But if ghosts were real, but you knew absolutely that ghosts weren't real, then anything that you experienced that would be data proving that ghosts were real, you would have some way of making an excuse for it. Your mind would somehow adapt the information and just say, okay, well, that's somebody lying or somebody out for themselves or they're making it up. And you could have video proof, but of course the video could have been doctored. Even if the evidence were true, your mind would spin it because of your absolute conviction. This is why it's dangerous, for example, for detectives working on a case to have a theory in advance of what happened. As soon as they begin to lock on to what they think happened, they can begin to lock out anything else. And anybody who's studied to be detective or any kind of forensics understands the confirmation bias that comes with any predetermined conclusions. This is part of the issues that you'll have in certain organizations when the organization has a fixed view of things. Evidence starts coming in to support that view. It's what Thomas Jefferson was talking about in the last video. So one of the things to be aware of is that if you are going to hold absolute truths, it's going to narrow your view of the world. Let's take political philosophies, for example. It's very common for people to be locked into a political ideology. They become ideologues in the sense that they absolutely know that their political view or their political party is absolutely right and everybody else is absolutely wrong. Now, it doesn't matter if you're conservative, liberal, libertarian, Tea Party, whatever the thing is, if you lock into a truth, you're going to lock out evidence that contradicts that truth. So you have to be careful about how you go about evaluating information. This is something that also happens culturally. If you have, some people just know how the French are, or know how the Germans are, or know how the Japanese are, or know how the Mexicans are, or know how, however you categorize people. When you begin thinking in terms of categories and painting with a large brush, and if you somehow have this deeply embedded, especially if you were raised in a culture that said to you over and over again that a certain class of people, whether it's by geography, culture, race, ethnicity, whatever it is, even the police, politicians, whatever, however you group people, if you dismiss that group in your own mind because you know what the truth is, that's a sign that the adaptive unconscious is working. You have to be careful. One of the things that I do that I've learned over the years, because even as I started getting attracted towards a certain belief system or a certain way of looking at certain kinds of people, I always found exceptions to it, always found individuals who would go against that. And this is what the adaptive unconscious will also do. For example, if I believe the French or the Germans are a certain way, but I happen to meet somebody from France or Germany who is not that way, the stereotypical picture, then I'll make that, oh, that's an exception, but as a rule, the French or the Germans are this way. Now, it's important to understand that stereotypes are real. In other words, stereotypes tend to come up based on some kind of truth. However, a stereotype never really applies to a particular person. When our minds want to start taking people, turning them into objects, and we begin to see the image that's in our head rather than the person themselves, that becomes a problem. So what I do is I follow what's called the 95% rule, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I have a certain humility about how firmly I'm going to hold on to any particular belief. It's something I also call the Satan maneuver. I remember once, many years ago, seeing an evangelical minister on a program, and he was talking about how old the earth was, 6,000 years old, and he was following biblical references. This was his belief system. And the interviewer was asking him, well, what about the scientific evidence of fossils and dinosaurs and all of these obviously clear indications that the earth is much older than that, including life on earth? And the minister said, well, Satan put him there. And the interviewer, he had to stop, because what happened at that moment is the moment that Satan was invoked, as soon as a kind of magical or supernatural explanation was brought in, we were out of the form of reason and evidence and into a different kind of forum. Now, not to say that forum may not be real, but the point is, if you're coming from evidence and reason, there's certain kind of things that will distinguish that or take you out of that. And I call that the Satan maneuver. But people of religious persuasion aren't the only ones that will commit the Satan maneuver. You'll find it among people who bill themselves as scholars or scientists. I've heard it, for example, take out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences. If you talk to anybody who's worked with the dying for years and years and years, they will say there's something going on. However, people who try to explain everything according to the mind, well, the mind is so powerful, it can make all these experiences up. The mind is a replacement for Satan. When the mind can do everything, now the Satan maneuver comes in a different form. We can explain everything with the mind, so we don't have to go with any other explanation. I found this in Shakespeare studies as well. Shakespeare studies, when anybody questions who the author was, there are people who will just say, well, Shakespeare of Stratford was a genius. This genius explains everything. He didn't have to have experience. He didn't have to acquire knowledge. He didn't have to travel to know about Italy. When the mind can explain everything, it explains nothing. It's a form of the Satan maneuver. Everything is magically explained. The final thing the adaptive unconscious does is it creates motivation. In other words, if there is a difference between the two pictures, the inner picture and the outer picture, it creates drive and energy to resolve that. It either explains away the outer picture, or you have to do something to change the inner picture. So, for example, if I'm thinking about becoming an engineer, but I'm not one yet, but that idea captures my imagination, and I can see myself being an engineer. I want to be an engineer. Inwardly, I start feeling that picture. I have this goal that I've set. That creates energy and motivation for me to change the outer picture. So I will go to school. I'll do the study. I'll take the tests. I'll do what's necessary to then get to a point where I can call myself an engineer. So the adaptive unconscious is also the thing that matches the pictures to maintain the truth about yourself and about the nature of reality, but it also will create motivation to resolve the conflicting pictures one way or the other. So observe yourself. What triggers knee-jerk emotional reactions when it comes to religion and politics, the types of people, challenging ideas, proposals for change? These are signs that you may have locked onto an image and your adaptive unconscious is trying to spin you away from it because of the reaction. This is what happens in politics particularly. If I can implant an image in your mind that says, this political opponent over here is racist, sexist, bigoted, he's out to harm children and kill old people. If I can get that emotional image planted in your head, it doesn't matter what the person does. I've devalued them in your head, and you'll see this image rather than what's out there. What are the signs that are keeping you in a box? What caused you to look at somebody and go, they're insane? What do you mean? And it could be a reasonable proposal. It could be just an alternative political, religious point of view. But if it strikes you as insane, but everything else about this person, they're really good in areas. There's just this one area, there's some insanity there. If the word insane comes up in that context, it could be a sign that you've locked onto something and your mind is trying to dismiss it. It doesn't even want to look at it. So be humble. The 95% rule is, no matter what I believe firmly, I'll go there 95%. But I'm going to keep some humility because I'm going to give myself a 5% chance that even my strongest convictions could be wrong, and that evidence or reason could come along and change my mind. As long as I keep that door open, I'm much less likely to have these knee-jerk emotional reactions to lock onto things in a way where I'm not going to listen to other people. So observe yourself, especially when in terms of motivation and setting goals. When you set a goal, where is that picture initially located, inside or outside? When you're setting a goal, the picture is inside, obviously, because you haven't achieved it yet. What happens when you set a goal you want to achieve? It triggers this energy, this drive to achieve the goal, especially if you want to go there. But what happens when you or someone else sets a goal for you that you resist? Now that's a different story. I don't really want to go there, so I'm less likely to get on board with it, and the motivation isn't there in the same way. That's all for now. In the next episode, we're going to go into self-image and self-talk. In the meantime, check out my book, Creating Your Life, What You Should Have Learned as a Teen.